welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. This episode is sponsored by Contender. How are you doing on LinkedIn? If you're like 99% of lawyers, your answer is not great, which makes sense. You learned LinkedIn as the place to stash a digital resume and share firm pressers. So no wonder your LinkedIn presence is somewhere between vanilla and non-existent. But I've got good news. Since we all learned LinkedIn the wrong way, it's pretty easy to attract more positive attention for you or your business. Since 2022, Contender has been the premier agency helping lawyers go from invisible to impossible to ignore on LinkedIn. To learn more, check out www.contenderllc.com. Tell them Claudio sent you. Today we have the opportunity to listen to Jonah Perlin. Jonah is a professor at Georgetown Law, and today he will be sharing with us a little bit about his profession, his work as a lawyer early on, and now as a podcaster, also as the creator of an incredible, helpful newsletter called Standout Summer Associate. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jonah.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's an honor to be here. It's always weird being on the other side of the microphone. Having done over almost 150 episodes myself of my own podcast, I know how much work it takes, and it is just a real honor to be here with you, given all the things that you do in public. So I'm grateful that you asked me to be on.
No, I really appreciate you taking the time to being here today. And to start this off, I'd love for our audience to get to hear from you a little better about who are you? Can you introduce yourself to are you?
Sure. Yes. So, as you said, I teach full time at my alma mater, Georgetown Law School, and I came to Georgetown. I just finished my 7th year of full time teaching. I teach legal practice, which is what we call at Georgetown, sort of previously known as legal research and writing, although we do other practice based skills as well. And I came to Georgetown after teaching as an adjunct for a year and a half teaching advanced legal writing. I absolutely adore my job. I am the first person to tell you that lawyers can love what they do. Doesn't mean you have to love everything, right? Reading the same 1L legal memo 60 times is not my favorite activity in the world, but I love what I do because I like training the next generation of future lawyers. That's really where I see my fit in the world. It's not something that you get told when you're in 4th grade that that's the job you want, but that's the job I found, and I'm really lucky. Before that, I worked at a law firm, Williams & Connolly, here in Washington, D.C., my hometown, where I was doing mostly international and domestic complex litigation. And I also clerked for 2 judges, first Judge Chevelle on the district court here in D.C., and then up on the 2nd Circuit for Judge Katzman. So that's sort of the professional me. The personal me is I'm a dad. I have 2 kids, 2 daughters, 10 and 7. And I live here in Washington, D.C. and really enjoy D.C. sports teams, which right now is a tough place to be. So that's me in a nutshell.
Love that. Love that. How hot is it in DC this week?
It is very, very hot. I was at a swim meet for my daughters last night, and I think the temperature gauge hit 99. So it was quite warm. I don't know what that is in Celsius for my Celsius listeners, but hot.
There you go. Now that's descriptive enough and scary enough. Here in Toronto, we're just about the same temperature this week, I guess. So it's been a hard one. And I actually just spoke with somebody else who been the podcast who's down in Arizona. So I'm trying not to complain too much.
Right, even warmer, even warmer. Just a little wet, a little more humid here in Washington, and I'm sure in Toronto as well.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Jenna, to jump into today's questions, you've had quite a bit of a diverse journey starting up your career. As you mentioned, you clerk, you worked at a law firm, now you work at a university. So you've got a little bit of everything. And also you get to speak with a lot of lawyers who lawyer differently. So I'd love for you to tell our listeners quickly, if you could, about your podcast.
Sure.
Then also, I'd love to ask you what first drew you into law, and also maybe what has been keeping you in it.
Yeah, so let me try to answer those 2 different questions in a sort of consistent way. What drew me to the practice of law was what I perceived lawyers did every day more than a singular vision about what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. I've talked about this on my podcast and other places, but I grew up, my mother is a rabbi, and one of the things you learn when your parent is a public figure, clergy leader, is you just talk to people and you get to watch that person lead people and teach people and make people's lives better. And I thought that's what I wanted to do for a long time, to sort of stay in the family business. But ultimately, I decided that becoming a rabbi was not for me. But some of those skills that I learned as a very young child, specifically, I can remember it like it was yesterday, but standing in our social hall Friday nights after we had our Friday night service, and literally as an 8-year-old, I was wearing a suit and talking to adults about what they did every day. Little did I know that that experience, and I don't know whether it was because I was good at it or I just did it a lot, but that experience would play into the kind of lawyer and the career I wanted to be. So I worked backwards to sort of work forwards as to what I wanted to do. But I went to law school not knowing what kind of lawyer I was going to be. I really mean that. I thought, I kept telling people I'm going to be an international lawyer. I didn't know what an international lawyer was, but I knew that Georgetown had a lot of international law classes. Unfortunately, once I got there, I basically didn't take any of them because I found other interests once I got there. And which brings me to the podcast, right? So fast forward almost 10 years into my career, it's the middle of a global pandemic, and I'm spending a lot of time with my students on Zoom. And a consistent complaint, concern, stress that I heard from them was everyone tells me that in order to figure out what I want to do as a lawyer, I need to talk to other lawyers. But how do I do that when I'm taking law school from my grandparents' basement? 3,000 miles away, as some of my students were. That's a hard question to answer. And it's sort of an unprecedented question. It had never been done before. And at the same time, I was looking for other creative outlets that were consistent with my job, but different than sort of the day-to-day of teaching and writing. And so that's why I decided to start the How I Lawyer podcast, was to sort of take that skill that I started developing as an 8-year-old of talking to people about what they did every day, and to meet the need or the challenge or the problem that my students were having, which was learning about the profession, right? We are a profession of passed down wisdom, but if you don't make those connections or don't have those opportunities to get the wisdom passed down, then it's very hard to learn how to be a lawyer or what kind of lawyer you want to be. And so I figured I could use that interest in talking to people and hearing about their life and the network that I had built and sort of the network of the network that I had built to have some of these conversations for my students. And I still to this day, when I draft my questions or I go to an interview, I always try to think, what would that student in their grandmother's basement 3,000 miles away, what would that student want to know? It's not what I want to know. It's what they want to know. And 140 something episodes later, I'm still doing it. It'll be 5 years next January, which is wild. The podcast has changed in some ways, and in some ways it's exactly the same format that I've been doing for the last 4.5 years. And it has been so incredibly gratifying to have those conversations and have those conversations sort of listened into by people in ways that I hope make them better lawyers and help them find better careers.
Well, that's amazing. I must say that I'm one of the people that got so inspired by what you do there. There's something that I've noticed on LinkedIn that quite a few law students across the US were sharing their networking goals. And it seemed like something somewhat popular was the notion of meeting 100 lawyers over the 3 years of their JD program.
I love it.
Yeah, so I started my LLM here in Toronto, hearing people talk about that. And the kind of it was an interesting moment here too, because the Faculty of Law was turning 75 years. I had a 1 year long program. I felt like 100 was too much, and I didn't have the 3 years and all of that. But then I really locked in to meet with 75 lawyers over that period, and it's been an incredible opportunity. And I noticed how after having, those maybe 31st conversations, even though a lot of the questions I had were somewhat consistent because of the outcomes I was expecting, but also I felt like I kind of learned what questions I needed to ask as well. So I love how you said something about, once you start law school and all of that, maybe you don't have that clarity, but it's really after you start having those conversations that you know what you ask next. So I might that all so interesting to see. And I'd love to hear about, how After you started the podcast and now, over 140 episodes in, how has this project also shaped a little bit of your views on legal careers, on the role of mentorship? Because I believe that these are both topics that come up over and over and
A
over.
lot, a lot. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, and I think that the meeting with 75 lawyers is such an awesome way of thinking about it, right? Our legal education is often cast as, uh, an experience of learning how to think like a lawyer, and I think only by talking to enough lawyers can you sort of triangulate all the other skills besides thinking, plus thinking. But I think a big piece of it is understanding what is possible and how you can live your life as a lawyer. And I'm sure that's true for other professions. Obviously, I don't have quite the background in others, but I think there's something unique about the practice of law that really lends itself to learning by talking. And so, in some ways, I think we're kindred spirits in that regard. And if you're listening and you think, well, I can't start a podcast, I can't do this, you know what you can do? Find one lawyer who you find on the web or LinkedIn who looks interesting and ask to talk to them for 15 minutes. I'm not talking in even on Zoom. Don't try to find the coolest lawyer in the world, right? Don't try to find the managing partner of the biggest firm in the world because it's going to be a lot harder. Find someone who's doing something who's a couple years ahead of you and learn from them. So I couldn't agree more. But to get back to your question about sort of about the project and sort of how it's changed, what I've learned, all of those pieces. I mean, I think that in some ways the project is exactly the same as it was 4.5 years ago. Right. We live in a slightly different world. It's a lot harder to get people to schedule on Zoom than it was when we were all stuck in our houses. But ultimately, it's about sharing stories. And when you're a story facilitator, which is how I see myself when I'm the other side of the microphone, it's trying to find what stories to share. And so ultimately, I feel like that has stayed the same. What has changed and what is exciting about the legal profession is the legal profession has changed a lot in the 4.5 years I've been doing this. So some things are the same, like you said, the power and importance of mentorship. The number of people from the number of different practice areas who have said to me, it's because someone did something for me. That's why I am where I am today. It's because someone did something for me, which I hope inspires other people to be that someone to somebody else. That hasn't changed. But at the same time, our profession is incredibly responsive to the world we face. You could pick any number of examples. The big issue when I was talking to people in 2021 was remote work, COVID, how we were going to succeed as a society. We had great social unrest here in the United States at that time as well. Today, we're not talking about remote work quite so much, and we're talking about how is generative AI going to change the practice of law. We're talking about how are we going to respond, at least here in the States, to big changes in how our federal government works. So in a lot of ways, the legal profession is a mirror to the society in which we live. And so as society changes, we as lawyers have to be responsive to that change. And so that's the piece that, I like to think of all my episodes as evergreen, but I imagine if I go back and listen to some of the ones from 2021, they will both feel uh, like they could have happened yesterday, and they will feel at the same time like they're missing sort of the keynote of the moment. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of what I've been thinking.
No, I love that. I had somebody do a very nice comment recently. So one of the previous guests, Sandra Scheim, she mentioned something that we live in a time with extreme polarization in so many different things, and in a way, as a legal community and legal society, we have to find ways to continue moving on with civility, with unity, and all of that. And I just find that the podcast and telling stories is a really good way to do it. There was a quote, and I would misquote who it is that said it, but that says something along the lines that it's very hard to hate somebody whose story you know. And I just really, in a time where there's some strong sentiments about all kinds of things, I just find it amazing to get the chance to sit down, talk to people, and hear what they have to say, because
Absolutely.
I'm a true believer that everybody got something good to contribute to the world. And besides all that you've done and that you do, you've just came up with a new awesome project this summer, Jonah. So your newsletter, Standout Summer Associate, has been so helpful as a summer student myself. And it's interesting because I don't know that you expected it to be, used in other countries, used for
Sure.
people who are working in the government. So that's my situation here in Canada. So many like small gems. It's a great way to start my days. I'd love to hear, tell me how that started. What was that motivated you to start that?
Sure. As I said, I've been podcasting for a couple of years, but my primary writing is very academic, right? I study sort of legal ethics, legal profession, legal communication, and write in those spaces as well. But I've also sort of the last basically 6 or so years have written pretty extensively on social media. And there, my primary audience again is junior lawyers, law students, people entering our profession, and to a somewhat lesser degree, people already in our profession. And that's my North Star. That's my professional North Star, is to try to provide value to those folks, both value that I can provide, but also the value from others. The big difference between that and the podcast is I'm the story. I'm the person telling the story as opposed to the person facilitating someone else's story being told. And I've been playing with the idea of you got to meet the moment, right? And the moment right now, we had the moment of podcast, we had the moment of social media. And I think right now we're in this moment of newsletters. So I really wanted to just try it, frankly. And something I've done the past few summers is post fairly frequently, with the audience specifically being folks in their first or second legal job, usually during the summer for a short period of time. And so I thought, what if I sort of compiled that and created a little bit of more regular cadence? I'm old enough to remember when I was in law school and we were still in the heyday of blogs. I had a blog for a very short period of time, not about law, pre-law school, and I sort of missed that writing and that sort of genre. So it's slightly longer form than social media, but not quite academic articles. And so I figured this is a good audience to do it for. I'll do it for free. It's a good time for me as an academic because I'm not teaching classes in the summer. I'm just writing. So this is a nice sort of off speed activity. And I figured at the end, I'd have a handful of things to share and maybe a few people would read it. So I think it's been pretty successful. I don't know. I will tell you, it's a lot harder than podcasting or social media to get feedback. It's not, you don't get quite the number of likes. Fewer people write in. You're doing it in the written word instead of the spoken word. So I don't think I have quite the same sense of its impact, which means it's really great to hear that people are reading it, and I do get some feedback to that effect. I thought I would write once or twice a week. Then the first 2 weeks I wrote every day, at least every weekday, excluding holidays. And then I said, okay, so I guess I'm in this for that. So basically my plan now, we're in the middle of June when we're recording, end of June when we're recording. My plan is to sort of go till sometime in July, probably mid to late July. At that point, if I haven't conveyed the wisdom, it might be a little bit late and you'll have to wait till next summer. I've also been really, really excited. And this is the piece that if I do this again next summer, I'd really want to expand. I've had a bunch of people offer to write guest posts, and that has been incredibly valuable. I frankly don't know. I haven't done any focus groups on the readers to value to them, but I think having my voice with other voices in the same sort of general approach, feel, package has been incredibly valuable, and I would hope to expand that. So yeah, if you or anybody else is reading it, if you're not, you can find it. It's free. Standout Summer Associate. StandoutSummerAssociate.substack.com. I think I got that right. And if you're hearing this and you'd like to write something, let me know and I'm happy to publish it. So that's the newsletter.
Amazing. Well, you've spoken about, different skills. You spoke about even communication in a way. So let me ask you, what are some small habits that new lawyers or, students who are transitioning into the workforce that they can do to get noticed in a good way? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Ooh, great question. Love that question. It's a question I try to ask everyone, and it's one of those questions. If you're asking people, it's a great one. I'll pick two of many. I think the first one is to always know the purpose and audience for whatever you're doing. Now, this is the legal writing professor coming out in me. If any of my students are listening, you're probably tired of me hearing me say this, but ultimately, I think all activities, communications, projects, the difference between the opportunity for success and absolute failure is not knowing what is the purpose and who is the audience. If you know those two things, you have checked off at least some of the necessary steps to success. So what do I mean by that? Let's make this a little more concrete. If a partner gives you an assignment on your first day to write a memo about some statute that has recently changed, right? If you don't know who's going to read that memo, you probably are not going to write the memo they expect. Is the only person who's going to read that the partner who already knows the history of this statute? Is this something that the partner is planning to send to their client who doesn't happen to be a lawyer? Is this something that they're going to post on the website for a general audience? What is the purpose of the document? Is the purpose of the document to just explain what has happened? Is the purpose of the document to make a case for something new? If you don't know the answers to those questions, and it sounds so simple, but I am telling you, I hear this from students all the time when they come back from their first summer. That's the benefit that I get is I keep getting older, but my students stay the same age. And they all come back the second summer and consistently they tell me, thank you for reminding me purpose and audience, because if I didn't ask that question, I would have written the wrong document and you can't succeed. So that's one, purpose and audience. And I think that's true. Frankly, I think that's true in almost every facet of life, but definitely as a junior lawyer. And then the second is to really embrace the process. And what I mean by that is I think, and maybe this is because we like all watch TV shows with lawyers in them that are not real, that we think you graduate law school and you're like, I am ready to stand up in court and try a case. And you're not. Or by contrast, you have so much fear, or sometimes we talk about imposter syndrome, that we feel like we could never possibly talk to a client, right? So the two extremes, either I'm ready to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or I'm not even ready to like call my assistant to tell her that we need to schedule a meeting. Both of those emotions sometimes come into new lawyers. And I think the response to that of those emotions is to just recognize that it's a process and it's step by step and you're going to grow, but it takes time. Being process oriented means being patient, but it also means not sitting back and being lackadaisical and letting things happen, right? If you're not getting experiences, it's either because you're not ready for them, in which case, wait, you'll get there, or it's because you're not seeking those experiences out, and that's on you. So embrace the process and see everything as a stepping stone. Something as simple as putting together signature pages for a transaction, formatting a letter that goes to clients, building a timeline of a set of facts. Those are not the reasons you went to law school, nor did law school teach you how to do those things, but they are part of the process of building a set of skills that are almost impossible to sort of put on a checklist of what it means to be a lawyer in your area of practice. So I got others, but those are the two that jump to mind.
Fantastic. No, and I think those really are so helpful, and especially I like them because I don't think many people spoke about them specifically here. So I love that you brought those up. And our conversation is being so good, but time's flying by. For wrapping up today's episode, I wanted to ask you another question, also in that sense of advice for juniors and students. So I feel like a lot of us feel some sort of pressure about our path, about the career we're getting into, um, especially for not having everything figured out. I don't know if I want to be a transactional lawyer for the rest of my life. I don't know if I just want to litigate. I don't know if I want to go in house or all the million options there are. So, what kind of advice would you give to people who are struggling with that kind of thought?
Yeah, one of the awesome parts, and I think this is true worldwide, but one of the awesome parts about being a lawyer is that you can do almost anything if you're trained as a lawyer. But one of the great challenges of being trained as a lawyer is that you can do almost anything. And as a result, by definition, right, you don't know where you're going. And that's okay. And in fact, that's expected. I've written pretty extensively and talk about this a lot. There's this famous quote from Steve Jobs that careers only make sense looking backwards. I'm butchering the quote, but it's basically like constellations only make sense when you figure out what you're drawing and you find the star. Ultimately, I think lawyers' careers, and all careers, but truly careers for lawyers, I feel like really, really hit this spot. They only make sense looking backwards. And so I think we talked about LinkedIn a little bit earlier. Like I think LinkedIn, the LinkedInification of people's careers, and I love LinkedIn for this purpose, that you can see how people have had lots of different careers. But the terrible part about it, the worst part about it, is that when you look at someone's LinkedIn profile, it looks like it was all planned from the outset, right? I'm going to do this for 2 years, then I'm going to do this for 2 years with a 1 month gap, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And that's not how it happened. That's why if you talk to real people who have gone through real careers, oftentimes what's not on LinkedIn is the job that they didn't get. It's the personal challenge that made them change cities. It's the fact that they thought they got the job of their dreams and had the boss of their nightmares. And so they had to leave. Or an election happened, or a coup happened, or the world changed fundamentally around them. You can't plan for those things. Careers only make sense going backwards. And so I say that not to say that you don't have any control, but to say that you don't have any control of the end, you only have control of what's next. And so my recommendation is just keep building, keep trying things, keep responding to the moment. Sometimes students come in their first day of law school and they come in and they're like, I know I want to work for this judge on this day. And I look at them and I say, that's great. But what if that judge isn't hiring your year? Right? That's no fault of yours, but it means that your one thing that your goal is actually impossible to meet. And so instead, look at the options before you in that moment and see what's next. And then it will make sense looking backwards. And so I hope that gives people not sort of license to do nothing and not fear that they can never get where they want to go, but just comfort that when you look backwards, all those moves will fit together in a way that they didn't from the front end, if that makes sense.
It does, 100%. Thank you so much, Jonah. No, much appreciated all of the advice you shared. It was amazing to learn a little more about your story as well. You always get to listen and understand a little more about what your guests are and do, but here's the most, you also get to know a little more about your stories. Thank you so much once again for joining in the podcast. And thank you all for taking the time to listen into today's episode.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And everybody keep listening to all of these interviews because I really do think you're carving out a niche that we really need in our profession. And so I'm super grateful for that.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. This episode was sponsored by Contender. Check them out at contenderllc.com.